Hi there, welcome to this video. So I'm going to go through spec point 6.3.1c, which is recycling within ecosystems. I'll do two separate videos. This one I'm going to do the carbon cycle, and then the other one I'm going to do the nitrogen cycle. Beware that the spec usually refers to them as recycling within ecosystems. So look out for that phrase in questions. All they mean is that there's only so much carbon in the ecosystem, so it has to be recycled, like it has to go into the rocks, into the air, into the living things. It goes in between all of those things. We can't make more, okay? So it's being recycled. And the same with nitrogen. We're not making new nitrogen, it's just that the nitrogens go from here to here to here to here, round in a cycle, all right? So in this first video, I'll go through carbon cycle, and the second one I'll go through nitrogen. This is exactly what it asks for in the spec. So with regard to the carbon cycle, the organism processes are photosynthesis, respiration and decomposition, and then it wants physical and chemical effects. And for nitrogen cycle, these are the microorganisms that you definitely need to learn, that they can ask you to recall. So on this video I'll do carbon cycle. So let's have a look at the carbon cycle. Now, I always think it's easiest to start the carbon cycle with a plant, and then the plant gets eaten by some kind of animal. Okay, so here's our plant, here's our animal, and obviously we've got feeding in between. Now, sometimes our animals and our plants die, and then they decompose, and we call that decomposition. And decomposition happens due to decomposers. Now, the decomposers are little living organisms, all right? So let's think about the words that they asked for in the specification. Photosynthesis, decomposition, respiration. So there's our decomposition. Photosynthesis is obviously just the plants. So photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide in the air into the plant, and we'll put photosynthesis on the arrow. Respiration happens by anything that's living is respiring, so the plant will be respiring, and that releases carbon dioxide back into the air. The animals will be respiring, that will release carbon dioxide back into the air, and even these decomposers will be respiring, releasing carbon dioxide into the air. Anything that's alive, the cells need to respire all the time to stay alive. Okay, so that's what this part of the specification is referring to, those three processes that the organisms are doing. Now, we also need to link this to the physical and chemical. So this is where is the carbon when it's not in the air and not in these organisms. Okay, so the first place that we might find it is in the rocks. So carbon sometimes is in, in rocks. And carbon can turn, can get into rocks basically when they don't decompose. Okay, so it's what's happening when things don't decompose. If they decompose, they're broken down, and all the minerals and everything that they were made of just goes into the ground. Okay, if for some reason they don't decompose, then they may get turned and form part of rocks. So it's not going from after decomposing to rocks, it's kind of like going instead of that down, carbon into rocks. An example of a rock made like this could be limestone, something like that. Okay, how do we get the carbon out of rocks? That's by weathering. So weathering would break down those rocks, and ultimately those little bits of carbon from those rocks might end up in the ocean. Okay, so carbon dioxide can be dissolved in the ocean, or the carbon from the carbon dioxide can dissolve in the ocean, and it can also go the other way. So we needed like an arrow going both ways, just here. Okay, so the carbon can break down through weathering, and little bits can break off, and ultimately the carbon can end up in the ocean. Or the carbon dioxide in the air can dissolve in the ocean, and the carbon in the ocean can end up back in the carbon dioxide in the air. So that's a double way kind of arrow just there. All right. The final way that the carbon can get into the air is it can come from volcanoes. All right, I'll just put the arrow going around the other side just because I've run out of space there. So rocks, you might remember from Key Stage 3 rock cycle a long time ago. Rocks, get these sedimentary rocks like limestone through stuff layering and layer, like sediment we call it, just little bits from life settle on the ground, and more and more and more. We get sedimentary rocks, which are the layered rocks. And then you might remember that actually as more and more layers go on top, they get squashed under so much heat and pressure, they turn into what we would call metamorphic rock. And then from there, sometimes they go so deep in the earth, down into the earth, and so much heat and pressure, so much pressure that they get heated and can melt and then come out of volcanoes as basically a liquid rock that when it cools sets. So you've heard of magma and lava, I'm sure. So carbon in rocks can actually end up coming out through a volcano. And the carbon at that point, when the volcano erupts, can go back into the air. Okay, so what we can see here is just carbon going all over the place. I know it looks kind of overwhelming when we see a picture like this, but if we start off like I did with the plant, the animal, the decomposing, the photosynthesis, respiration, and then you add the other bits on, it's a little bit easier. If you want to know where the kind of physical and chemical fits in, if you think about physically, we're talking about kind of physical things like weathering, and when we're talking about chemically, we're talking maybe like dissolving in the oceans, etc.